go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
How far out can you get? How far out can you get? That's the big question in television today, and CBS has the big answer. Its fabulous new series, Lost in Space.
This is Alpha Control, resuming countdown. We are at 6 minutes, 40 seconds, and counting.
Ladies and gentlemen, today, the first of what may be as many as 10 million families per year is setting out on its epic voyage into man's newest frontier for colonization, deep space.
And from all over the world, correspondents have gathered to voice their enthusiasm for this show that ventures farther out in concept than television has ever gone before. You can say it in any language. Lost in Space is a top-budget, top-quality show designed to dazzle the eye and ear with the most impressive production values and spectacular effects ever lavished on any TV series. We've put it on the launching pad for the new season in a trajectory aimed at the mass family market, appealing to every age group with entertainment as unusual as it is exciting.
Countdown minus 10 seconds. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blast off!
Yes, we're taking off for the stars on a journey that no longer seems as far out and fantastic as it would have only a few years ago. For now we live in the space age. Mr. and Mrs. Average American and all their kids have marveled at the heroic exploits of our pioneer astronauts. They're ready to project themselves into the foreseeable future with this family of space explorers. If you're wondering about a certain lack of animation in their expressions, it's because they've been frozen solid to survive the tremendous time span of travel to another galaxy. A journey interrupted en route when their ship is blasted by a barrage of meteors. Battered off course, they're drawn into the orbit of a mystery planet.
Mr. President, status control on Jupiter 2. As of this moment, the spacecraft has passed the limits of our galaxy. It's presumed to be hopelessly lost in space.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen.
And on this episode of Planet 8, boys and girls, we're going to jump right into it. The classic science fiction television show, Lost in Space. This is not the Netflix version. This is the original from back in the day. Straight away, we'll kick it over to our chief engineer, Bob. what do you have to say about Lost in Space?
What do I have to say about Lost in Space? Other than I love it. I definitely grew up with Lost in Space. In fact, being the old guy that I am, I did watch it when it was originally on in the 60s. I was only like 5 or something, but I did watch it. In fact, just a side story before I get into anything. When we did the Sci-Fi X-Fest at the Bal Theater, we had Marta Kristen, who played Judy, as a guest. And when we took her out to dinner, I told her, and I think I told this story on our Halloween episode, but I was watching Star Trek 2 at the time, and they got to the episode with the 3 witches, Cat's Paw, and they're down on the planet, and 3 witches are, go back, Captain Kirk. Scared the crap out of me. I never watched Star Trek again until it came back in syndication. So I stuck with Lost in Space. And I always preferred Lost in Space, mainly because, hey, there's more monsters, and it was colorful and entertaining. And I always loved Lost in Space. Always wanted a robot. Haven't gotten a robot yet. Maybe if I win the lotto or something. When I win the lotto, I got to buy a Batmobile and a robot.
Yeah.
And my life will be complete.
We were at the Sci-Fi Summit in Pasadena, and they had like Robbie the robot. They had a replica of Gort. And I'm like, God, if I was a rich man.
Yeah, there's some friend of mine on Facebook. He's got Robbie, Gort, and B9, the Lost in Space robot.
Jeez.
And he's got like other, movie robots as well. It's like a whole room of, he doesn't have like all the toys and books and collectibles that we all have. He just has all these huge life-size collectibles.
He has actual freaking props.
Yeah, it's very impressive. But anyway, back to Lost in Space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know back in the day, actually, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was already on ABC. So Irwin Allen had a little track record with sci-fi. And he was interested in doing a version of the Swiss Family Robinson. And he had his people looking into the rights. And it turned out Swiss Family Robinson, the novel, was in public domain. Now, Disney had done Swiss Family Robinson a few years earlier, like in this, I think it was 1960. But supposedly, since it was in public domain, it was okay for other people to do it. Basically, Irwin Allen was pitching it to networks. And he hooked up with a guy named Guy Della Chiopa. I think that's how his name is pronounced. And Guy was production partners with this little known comedian named Red Skelton. And so Red Skelton was on CBS, and when Guy brought Lost in Space to CBS, they didn't want to tick off Red Skelton. That was one of their big entertainers at the time. So they gave it a chance. But it was originally pitched as Swiss Family Robinson, and then someone at the network, an unnamed person as far as I could see, said, hey, why don't we put it in space? Because back then, that was when people were glued to their TV sets and watching Gemini and all the rockets take off from Cape Canaveral, and space was a big thing, and we were just starting to explore it. So they started it off as Space Family Robinson before changing it over to Lost in Space. I think Warren Comics had a version of Space Family Robinson out before the TV show. So
I was just going to say, I wondered if that was why the comics were called Space Family Robinson, because they were going with that earlier.
Well, yeah, well, that was done before Lost in Space. Okay. In fact, I think there was like one issue where the story title of the issue was Lost in Space.
Huh.
But it wasn't predominant enough to, it wasn't like trademarked or copyrighted or anything. So Irwin Allen was able to use Lost in Space, but that's why they changed it from Space Family Robinson, is because of the comic.
Well, they actually threatened to go to court. I was reading up in the fantasy worlds of Irwin Allen, And because they had already done adaptations of The Twilight Zone, which was on CBS, and some other properties, they worked it out because neither company saw a win in keeping it stuck in litigation. They could each have, use of the name and, make money. And that's basically how they settled that.
Yeah, I think that's basically when the comic book changed over to Lost in Space. Still different characters, though, strangely enough. But they did put photos from the show on the cover to cash in on it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Irwin Allen, like I say, he had Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea on ABC, and so he was able to get Lost in Space launched on CBS. And the first half or so of the first season was very much like old black and white sci-fi B movies. Say what you will. That was before the trinity of Smith, Will, and the robot. But there was a show probably around the time of the two-parter with The Keeper with Michael Rennie. That was maybe about halfway through the first season. Something happened on another network right at the same time as Lost in Space. Same night, same time. Pow, zap, zowie, Batman came on the air and immediately kicked its butt in the ratings. Kicked all shows' butts in the ratings, basically. Batman was huge. And so at that point, Irwin Allen called a little meeting and said, look, how are we going to compete with Batman? And so they decided to go color. They decided to go camp, and that's when they decided to concentrate on the relationship between Will and the robot and Dr. Smith, which was at its height during the second season. And the third season kind of went back to the family dynamic a bit, but still you had all the crazy vegetables and everything else that were running around in the third season. So, but overall, like I say, I am binging it leading up to this episode. I was enjoying everything just as much as I did when I was a kid. And, if you don't sit there and take it as serious science fiction, take it as entertainment, it's great as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, I was like you, Bob. I didn't watch it first run, but I loved Lost in Space as a kid. And it's interesting, I don't recall watching the first episode, the pilot episode. It seemed long as far as an episode goes, but the pacing was good. I mean, they touched on mummies and giants, and there was the big whirlpool in the middle of the lake and all this jeopardy. But I noticed there was no robot and no Dr. Smith. Matter of fact, the ship wasn't even called the Jupiter 7.
Jupiter 2.
Or the Jupiter 2, sorry.
It was like the Gemini 12, I think.
Yeah, it was...
That was...
No, go ahead, Walker.
But that was one thing that was kind of fascinating to me, because you guys know a lot more about Lost in Space than I do, because I watched it, occasionally on weekends. It wasn't on all the time like Star Trek was. And I don't really recall seeing the black and white episodes. I only really recall seeing color, and I hadn't seen the pilot before we did, prepared for the podcast. And there were a lot of changes between the pilot and the series. And like you were saying, Larry, there was no robot or Dr. Smith in the pilot. And then that pilot, it was just jam packed with stuff, which, got plugged in later into the later episodes. And you could tell that the pilot was designed to be a little more serious action adventure than the series later wound up being. It was really interesting to see the pilot and see what they were doing with that, and then to see how it shaped up later on, and how they used, what was in the pilot in the later episodes.
Yeah, and the pilot never really showed on TV. It was the first episode with Dr. Smith and the robot, and when he sabotages the Jupiter 2 and off it goes. That was the very first episode. However, Irwin Allen poured a lot of money into that pilot. knowing full well that that Irwin Allen never saw a frame of stock footage that he didn't love and use. So whatever he poured into that first pilot, which he got a ton of money to do, he knew he could use it. And he basically used parts of that over the first 6 or 7 episodes of Lost in Space. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he definitely got his money's worth out of it. And but they needed an antagonist. They needed some kind of back and forth drama, tension, what have you, which is why Dr. Smith was brought in. But there was, say what you will, it was a smart move.
Oh yeah, I was reading that with Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, they had the props and the sets from the movie that they could utilize, and it cut down on the cost of the TV series. They didn't have that with Lost in Space, and by virtue of it being in space, there was going to be a lot of expense that they had to mitigate episode to episode. When they filmed the models of the ships flying around or landing, those they filmed in color, knowing that they'd reuse them throughout the series. So he was a very wise person. He'd been in Hollywood for a number of years before Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Lost in Space. He'd worked with Groucho Marx in some movies, and Vincent Price. I was amazed reading about all the stuff that Irwin Allen did before Lost in Space. Obviously, the Towering Inferno afterwards, and the Swarm and whatnot. But
Poseidon Adventure. He was basically the master of disaster after his TV career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought was kind of funny, I was researching this, and some of the actors that were under consideration for Professor Robinson, in an alternate universe somewhere, there's a version of Lost in Space where Professor Robinson was played by Eddie Albert. They also had Michael Rene. Ronald Reagan was under consideration.
But it was spelled R-A-G-U-N.
Ray Milland, Lloyd Bridges, James Mason, Leslie Nielsen, Forrest Tucker, Hugh Beaumont, Richard Anderson from Bionic Man fame, Steve Allen, Walter Matthau.
Okay, that's just weird.
Well, the key was that Irwin Allen wanted big name people for the cast.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Angela Cartwright had done Sound of Music. She was coming off the Sound of Music when she was cast as Penny. Obviously, Bill Mumy had done Twilight Zone and a number of TV shows at the time. I think he even had a movie or two under his belt.
Oh, they knew they wanted him. There was no one else in consideration. He had a photographic memory, and he would read the script once and then just be able to boom. Yeah,
no, definitely. Guy Williams was actually coming off of Zorro. Mm-hmm. He was a big hit with Zorro. So that's when he got brought in. And even, Marta Kristen, she had a few, I think she was more novice, but she had a few roles under her belt.
I think she was in some beauty pageants also, and things of that.
But then again, Jonathan Harris, man, you catch him in episodes of a ton of things, whether it's Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Twilight Zone or whatever. He was in a lot of TV.
Right. Well, it was funny. I mean, even Darren McGavin at one point was under consideration. Now, for Maureen Robinson, they were looking at Jane Wyatt, of course, June Lockhart, Barbara Billingsley, Audrey Meadows, and believe it or not, Kim Hunter.
Well, until you get to Kim Hunter, those were all established TV moms.
So,
June Lockhart was coming off of 10 or 11 years or something on Lassie.
Lassie.
Yeah, one thing that struck me is how, she was seemed very dowdy, and she probably was supposed to be in her early 40s. But she seemed so much older, and maybe it's just the way things were back in the 60s. But there was just almost a grandmotherly nature to her. Yeah, it was really strange because Guy Williams, like you said, he was coming off of Zorro. He was sort of much more of a man of action. And it was an odd pairing to me in some ways. I mean, they had some chemistry there, but she just seemed much older to me in some ways than he did.
That's interesting, yeah.
Well, that was, I think, the key to that series was the entire family had chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the 1998 movie that came out, which was kind of the dysfunctional Robinson family.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they were trying to make it more of a realistic family or whatever. But the key to that show is the family and sticking together and the family unit type thing.
Well, yeah, I agree. Interestingly enough, Don West, some of the actors that were considered for Don West, Bob, did you know Nick Adams was considered for Don West?
Hey, no one cooler than Nick Adams.
Right? I mean, I can see that.
Well, and he was a hothead, so that would work.
Well, he was coming off The Rebel.
Mm.
And that was actually a couple of years before I went to Japan to do Monster Zero and Frankenstein Conquers the World.
Right. They also had Roddy McDowall.
That I cannot see.
I could see him for Dr. Smith. I don't know about...
Dean Stockwell. Guy Williams was actually considered for Don West.
Interesting.
Kerwin Matthews, James Darren, Martin Sheen, Burt Reynolds.
Wait a second. How old would Martin Sheen have been back then?
I'd have to do the math. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. He was in that Outer Limits episode, Nightmare, that we talked about
true.
a few.
That's
so he
true.
was a young dude.
Guess he's older than I thought.
Well, believe it or not, they also were considering a very young Bill Shatner for the role of Don West.
Oh, my God. Wait, another thing I noticed in the pilot, Major West was his background. He was introduced as like a scientist, and he was like doing studies on like life forms or something, like a more biology. But then he became the pilot, like of the ship later on, and they didn't talk about him being a scientist anymore.
Yeah, well, that was the original concept when Irwin Allen was drawing it up, was that you had Professor Robinson and then Don West was his lab assistant, or and they were basically, that's why they were both on the thing. But yeah, you have to figure if they were both scientists and his family's going, it's like, yeah, who's going to pilot that thing? Somebody's got to drive the ship and crash it every week.
It was an interesting change. I mean, given the guy's demeanor and everything, it made more sense that he was a pilot and maybe a military man rather than a scientist, because, yeah, he didn't carry himself the way you would expect maybe a scientist to. But
and then, they had Professor Robinson do a lot of the scientific stuff after that, and then of course Will Robinson, and
Will could do anything.
Yeah, he could. The other thing I thought was,
it kind of started off in War of the Robots when he found Robbie and or the Robotoid.
I know, that was like,
can I work on him, Dad? Yeah, he's sitting there like taking the thing apart and cleaning it up and putting it back together and getting it ready.
So this is a thing about the show. So I'm coming at it. I did watch it as a kid, but again, it wasn't like one of my favorite shows or anything. Although, I liked the robot and all the explosions and crazy stuff. It really is like a show you appreciate as a kid, but then when you watch it as an adult, there's so many bad decisions and things that, you would never do as an adult. You would never be like, sure, take apart that alien robot. We don't care. Or, I mean, you would have immediately thrown Smith out an airlock or abandoned him somewhere. There's just like the decision making is completely off, but it's in order to move this story into this, fantasy wish fulfillment thing that's going on that every little kid is going to enjoy, So when you watch it, or at least for me watching it at this age, I'm just like, this is insanity. It makes no sense. But, if you think of it as like a 9-year-old kid watching it, of course it's going to be delightful because it leads off into these crazy adventures. But yeah, it's kind of funny, and especially more so later on in the show. The early part of the show, the first season, is much more adventure oriented and a little more, makes a little more sense. And then it just really, as further you go, the more it kind of goes off the rails into kid fantasy.
Yeah. Well, like I say, once Batman hit, then all bets were off. They had to, they went with the colorful uniforms and the crazy space monsters. And, we talked about Irwin Allen never wasting a frame of stock footage. A lot of times back then you would see an alien on a planet and Lost in Space, and then they would paint it green, throw it under the water, and it would be on the next episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So they definitely, and I don't know if you saw in the episodes where they have this big like spider creature.
I think I saw one. I didn't see the episode, but I saw the lead-in.
Yeah, it was in The Keeper, and it was in a couple others. But that thing was also used in other. In fact, it showed.
Was it on Gilligan's Island?
It showed up on Gilligan's Island in a cave.
That's what I thought.
He had to throw that pigeon or dove or whatever at the spider. Same prop.
That creeped me out.
And then there was also another episode with like a bipedal dragon, which showed up in an episode of Batman when Batman comes out in the dragon suit. I think it was the Egghead episode. And he comes out like a dragon and everyone's like, ah, and he takes his head off as Batman. That was the same suit as the one in Lost in Space.
Well, the carrot suit that they had in Lost in Space, Wilbur was having a nightmare over on Mr. Ed. And this huge carrot... No, just kidding.
I almost had me.
I need moisture.
But they had some really nice... Like, every time they showed the Jupiter 2 flying, especially when they were either coming in for a landing or taking off on a planet, the effects with the little spinning propulsion thing, it looked so cool. It was always like, when I was doing the review for this, I was trying to find those episodes where they were showing, where they weren't just planet bound, where they were taking off from a planet or something, because those effects were really nice, really good. They had some good effects.
I always loved the Jupiter 2. I always loved all the mechanical stuff in there, whether it's the Jupiter 2 or it's the chariot, or in the third season they had the space pod, and of course the robot. But my friend Bill Winkler, he lived up in Woodland Hills, down in up above Hollywood. And he peered over his fence one time, and his neighbor had this old snowplow in his backyard. It was all like rusted and busted up. And he asked him where he got it. It was the chariot from Lost in Space. And he was going to try to restore it and put it into car shows and stuff, but they never got around to it. But yeah, I just think, you're in your backyard, you look at your neighbor's yard, and, oh, hey, it's the chariot.
That would have been cool.
The thing that was always perplexing was how all that stuff fit in the Jupiter 2. Because, it was apparently bigger on the inside than it looked on the outside.
Well, the Jupiter 2 was a lot like the teepees in old Bugs Bunny cartoons. Where it's like a little teepee and they go inside and it's this big, huge place. Or Arabian tents in the old movies.
Yeah. Same like the elevators on Discovery.
Oh, let's not go there. I can't even. Just wait till we do our Discovery episode. The pain.
Elevators floating around the ship.
Well, I tell you, when I was a kid, I loved the robot, and I would get these hand-me-down clothes from some of my older cousins, and I remember having this jacket, and the sleeves were longer than my arms, and my mother got a call because I was running around the play yard all day. Warning, warning, Will Robinson, shaking my arms up and down. The teacher said, "He's very disruptive."
Yeah, it's funny. I was going through old photos. And there were a couple photos of me with these shirts I had back in the 60s that they were kind of like V-necks, but they had like a collared shirt underneath, attached to it, but it wasn't like a button-down shirt. It was like, with a zip. And I remember vividly that I always wore those because of Lost in Space. In fact, I wore a lot of turtlenecks too because of was it James Darren in Time Tunnel?
Well, there you go.
So,
the robot really, really grew on me. I mean, I'm sure it did for a number of kids who watched that show. It was the voice of Robert May. And it never really hit me as a kid, but he's also the narrator for the episodes, giving us a recap of what happened.
Hold on. Rewind. Danger, danger. It was Dick Trufeld who did the voice of the robot.
Oh, he did the voice.
Bobby May was inside the robot.
Oh, see, I thought it was the same guy.
No. Bobby May, little short guy, he was inside the robot. And Dick Trufeld, who he also narrated some of the other Irwin Allen shows.
Okay, my bad.
He was the voice. And
all right, my apologies then. But the B9 robot was designed by the same guy who designed Robbie the robot for
Rob Kinoshita.
Planet, right?
Rob Kinoshita. Yeah, he did both Robbie and B9. In fact, Robbie's in War of the Robots, and then he returns again in I think it was Prisoners in Space, where they go onto this prison ship, and there's all these prisoners there, and the guard of the prison ship is Robbie.
Yeah, I saw that one. That one was interesting for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So, it's very cool. It's cool. I guess if you created something, you'd say, hey, we need a robot for this. Well, let me just grab my previous creation. But yeah, I mean, he showed up in The Invisible Boy, and I think he showed up in like an episode of Buck Rogers. I mean, Robbie made quite a few cameos over the years.
He was in the Twilight Zone also.
Yeah.
So the robot at first was called the Environmental Control Robot.
Right.
And I guess he was supposed to be there to help them like analyze planets they would go to or something.
There was this episode I saw, and out of his leg or foot, this little probe came out and picked up a sample of dirt.
Oh, yeah.
So they plugged him for...
That didn't seem to like follow through the rest of the show, though, right?
Yeah, I think it only did that once.
What's that, Bob?
I think it only did that once.
Okay.
He did have a tube that popped out and blew out like smoke a couple times. They do a smoke screen type of thing. But
yeah, that went the way of the dodo as the series moved forward. No more soil samples, no more analysis.
Oh, he had other things to do, like playing guitar and
right,
posing Dr. Smith down in the shower or whatever.
Yeah, well, I did see him sing and play guitar at one point. But yeah, he sort of kind of seemed to become like a Batman's utility belt, and he had everything. Like if they needed something, he was able to manifest it.
He was a Swiss Army robot.
Yeah. What was interesting to me was to kind of see, like, sometimes you could tell they'd film him mostly from the waist up, and you could tell that the person was walking, you know. And then sometimes you could tell he was on the treads. So you'd see a full body, and he'd be on the treads. And there was even a time where he was sitting on a rock, so you could see the legs were, like, bent. But that was the only one time did I see him sitting like that.
Well, yeah, there was also, I think it was in The Keeper, where he's like digging a trench and he's like squatting down somewhat.
Huh.
But there was also, I can't remember, it was one of the episodes that Debbie and I watched last night. And I had to pause it and scan back and show her again, because usually when Bob May would not have the treads on and he'd be walking, you know, they either just shoot him from like the knees up, or they have the robot behind some rocks. But there was one scene where he was behind rocks, and as he walked, the rocks got a little too low, and you could see Bobby May's legs sticking out of the bottom. Just like, you know, maybe a few inches of his legs. But I had to rewind and go, look, check this out.
Well, they were saying there were times where they'd be pulling him by a rope, so that the robot looks like he's moving across the, planetscape. And he was saying it was like a 275 pound suit, and he fell over once getting pulled, and
he was going like up the ramp into the Jupiter 2, and it was a little too steep, and he just fell backwards.
Yeah. I mean, the thing cost almost $40,000, and that's 1965 money,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but think of all the marketing they got out of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they've more than made their money back on it. I wanted to say, too, Karen, and Bob had made mention of Batman, and they kind of made it a little more campy. I didn't know this, but when they were early on in the production, back in 1965, they brought in Buck Houghton from Twilight Zone to give it like more science fiction than fantasy. And apparently he and Irwin Allen bumped heads, and Irwin Allen won out because it went from more science to less science by the time they hit the second season, tail end of the first season, really.
Well, I mean, it was basically going in that direction to begin with, and it would have been interesting to see if they stuck with that direction throughout all 3 seasons, or would it have made 3 seasons? Was it the camp that kept it going?
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember, I forget which episode, but I remember Mrs. Robinson was washing clothes, and she had a clothes hamper with dirty clothes, and she throws it in this washing machine, and I was like, oh, that's so like futuristic. Look at all the lights and stuff, and not even a second passes, and she opens up the washer, and everything's like wrapped up in plastic and put on hangers as she pulls out the clothes, and I'm like, okay, never mind.
Yeah, there's an episode later on too where she's making them new uniforms, and I think she's using the same machine, and she's like programming it, and these little uniforms pop out. I think Judy got the first one.
Well, some of it was just totally fantasy. I mean, I haven't watched all the episodes, but there were a few where like Will's reading from this book about the antimatter universe. This was the antimatter man, and it was sort of to me like a mashup of like Star Trek episodes, the alternative factor and the enemy within. Because Will's reading from this book about like an alternate evil universe, and it sort of just manifests. It's almost magical how it kind of like happens, almost like it's a evil book or something. And I don't know, but then evil John Robinson appears, and he's in like a black and white uniform, and it reminded me of, the Star Trek episode, like with the Lazarus, Lazarus.
Yeah.
But it was kind of cool. They had like a way to go to the dimension on like this sort of cloudy little walkway. Like
conveyor belt.
Yeah, it was crazy, but it was sort of evocative and then even the robot meets his evil self. And, and the colors are reversed, and like his light is green. And what's that, Bob?
So you're the goody one.
Yeah, it's like you're the goody. It was
that's one of my favorite episodes. That's why when we spoke earlier, I said, when you guys get to season 3, watch the Antimatter Man.
Yeah, it was, but it's definitely got a strong. It's more a fantasy, like a science fantasy element than or a fantasy. I would call it more a fantasy element than science fiction. But yeah, it just goes off into like wild adventures, which I can see why, like as a little kid, you're gonna love it, because it's just anything you can imagine can happen.
Right. That's what they tried to do with the stories. Buck Houghton, I'd said they brought him over from Twilight Zone. At one point in time, one of the arguments he had with Irwin Allen was trying to get Arthur C. Clarke to come in and work on some episodes. But he was working on Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. So he wasn't going to come on, even as a consultant. They're like, well, he can consult. And everyone's like, nah, I got stories. We don't need him.
Well, it's funny because
going to have a Ouija board, see? And when he touches the Ouija board.
Well, it's funny because when Peter Parker brought the script in for the Great Vegetable Rebellion, he gave it to everyone, and he gave it. Jonathan Harris had a story where Peter Packer handed him the script and said, "Read this script, and I don't want to hear anything about it." And he read the script, and he told Peter Packer, he goes, "This is the worst thing I've ever read." And Peter Packer's like, "I don't have another goddamn idea." It was like towards the end of the series. It's like, "I don't have any other goddamn ideas." So there you go.
Oh, God.
But they all talk about the Great Vegetable Rebellion and the fact that if you watch the episode, there's times when parts of the cast, some of the cast are like looking in another direction, or they kind of put their hand over their mouth or something, because they're all cracking up because they're talking to this big carrot, or Dr. Smith became a celery stalk or whatever. And,
I
it was
watched
just
that
like
last night.
trying to keep a straight face while they're doing this. And the funny thing, too, is when we had Marta as a guest at the Sci-Fi X-Fest, it came time for me to take her back to the airport because she had to go. Her flight was going. Her flight was leaving. So I walked in. I'm like, where's Marta? Oh, she's in the theater. Okay. So I go in to find her, and she's sitting watching the Great Vegetable Rebellion on the big screen. But she probably, she's probably seen it on TV screens. She probably never saw it in a movie theater before. So she's watching the Great Vegetable Rebellion, and I leaned over. I said, "Hey, it's time to go to the airport." She would not leave. She would not move until that episode was over.
Oh, man.
So it's like, they all say they hate it, but they all enjoy it. They all crack up when they watch it. So,
well, I will say, obviously it's one of the more memorable episodes, but I was fine with it as a kid. I'm like, oh, okay. And he needed moisture, of course, and then it was one more reason for me not to eat my vegetables. So.
Oh, yeah, because that's one. I think Dr. Smith looks at Tybo at one point, or looks at one of them and goes, "Oh, I love vegetables. I would never, I love them. They taste so good." And suddenly it's like, he's eating vegetables.
Right. Again, the competition with Batman and, later on Star Trek and stuff. But I know we were talking about the uniforms, some famously worn by Bob when he was a youth. But they would use primary colors and assign those colors to the kids. And someone had asked Irwin Allen's widow, why did they pick those colors? And she said Irwin knew that kids loved primary colors. And some colors were stronger than others. So the adults got those colors and the kids got those colors. And they just went with it. And on some level, I'm like, God, it worked. I never questioned it, but you just kind of knew Penny and Will were the kids, and Dawn and Professor Robinson were the, providers, or, the men. I mean, this was back in the 60s. It's interesting how nothing was really done by mistake. They really knew. And again, you have to credit Irwin Allen. He had a very successful career up to the Swarm, but that's another conversation to have.
Well, we spoke before on the podcast about the pink and purple and green hallways in Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And, back then, like I say, color was just coming into TV.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, if we're going to go color, let's go color.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was, and of course, Batman with the purple suit of the Joker or the green jumpsuit of the Riddler or whatever. They were totally embracing color. So when you got to Lost in Space and they were trying to kind of emulate Batman to compete with it, and that's why the uniforms were suddenly purple and orange and green. And I think third season they kind of went back to the silver jumpsuits for quite a few episodes.
A little bit, yeah.
But they still had the really colorful attire.
Well, and Karen, wasn't it? I think it was a Star Trek convention. It could have been where they were asking about the bright colors on Star Trek. And I don't know if it was Jimmy Doohan. My memory fails me, but they were saying that when Star Trek came out, that's when color televisions were being sold.
Yeah, well, this is in a number of books and other sources. It's pretty well known that, they wanted to sell televisions, right? So the networks had deals with the TV people, okay, we'll help you sell your TVs. We want our shows to be successful. So that's why, when they went from the original pilots to the series, everybody's uniforms suddenly went to much brighter colors, right? And that's where we got the red and the blue and what was supposed to be a sort of avocado green, but when you saw it on your TV, became the gold command color. Right. So yeah, everybody got bright primary colors.
Everybody wanted to buy a color TV.
Yeah, you've got to show those colors off, and the same with why is the lighting the way it is? Well, some of it's for mood, but some of it's also to show, bright colors on the ship. The ship was mostly, a blue-gray color, so you got to show colors in different ways. And
splash some lights on there. Get out the gels.
So,
all right. So talking Lost in Space and Star Trek, what do you think? Face off between John Robinson and Captain Kirk?
Oh, well, I'm super biased, so.
I don't know. I think John Robinson could hold his own in most of the fights he's in.
If John Robinson had his rocket, maybe. But without the rocket, I mean, Kirk had those karate chops and those half kicks down pat. I'd have to go Kirk. What do you say, Bob?
Kirk's
but John Robinson, man, he had all those years under his belt as Zorro.
One of the things I'll say, though, about great television leaders, they always relied on their people for their strength. That ultimately they'd make the decision and the sacrifice. But Robinson had his family and, Don and Dr. Smith. And, Kirk had the big three on the Enterprise, him, McCoy, and Spock. So good leaders both ways. So let me ask you guys this. Before we started recording, Bob and I were talking about the music. He was playing some of the music for us to get us in the mood. And I had told him I spent a small fortune getting the La La Land 50th anniversary box set for Lost in Space. But John Williams, Karen got on the call at that point. John Williams did the theme song for Lost in Space. And then Bob was saying a lot of the music for the...
He did both of the theme songs. The second one, when they got to the third season, they had the countdown. And that, I think, when people think of Lost in Space theme songs, they usually think of that one more than they do the one from the first two seasons.
I like that one better.
But yeah, he was basically Johnny Williams, and he did a lot of the incidental music. In fact, when you get into that La La Land set and you listen to a lot of Johnny Williams incidental music for Lost in Space, you can kind of hear Star Wars creep in here and there.
I was going to
think he was kind of laying the groundwork, And
did you want to? I mean, I know you have copies of CDs, Bob. Did you want a copy of the La La Land?
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay. We're talking bootlegging here on the episode, so.
I won't say.
But
yeah, we're not doing anything like that.
But I mean, there were other people that scored Lost in Space. It wasn't just Johnny Williams, but his are more of the more recognizable themes and incidental music and what have you. And I'm really wondering, and you guys might know because you're more into Star Wars lore than me. I always thought that the reason John Williams scored Star Wars is perhaps because George Lucas grew up with Lost in Space and maybe wanted him, hey, here's a guy who did Lost in Space or whatever. I know he did Jaws and whatever before, but I'm wondering if that had an influence on Lucas choosing him for Star Wars.
That's a good question. If any listeners out there know George Lucas personally, we'd love to have him on Planet 8.
Ask him for us.
I feel like I should be able to answer this question, and I can't, and it makes me feel somewhat ashamed of myself.
I'm wondering if he ever mentioned that in any interviews or anything.
I need to go look that up.
I know. I need to pull out all my books.
Yeah. I will say, I think the music is a highlight of the series and really helps to accentuate the action and what's going on. I mean, it's amazing what music can do for a show or a movie. I mean, we know that, like, you see Star Wars without the music, and then they put the music on it, and you realize just how much it really builds emotion and mood and everything. And it's the same with this show. It's like, wow, that music is so great. That it caught me so many times where I would hear the music and I realized, oh yeah, I remember this music from when I was a kid. I might not remember some of these episodes, but like I'd hear the music and it would trigger a memory. So,
well, I mean, secondary to the themes, I mean, the first, I guess, 2 seasons, they would take a little clip from the beginning of the next episode and tack it on the end of the previous episode. And of course it would come up, same time next week or whatever. And they'd have that, da-na-na, da-na-na, da-na-na. Yeah, that was John Williams. And then of course the 3rd season, you had the countdown at the beginning, which always excited me as a kid because, some alien would pop up or Dr. Smith would scream or whatever, and then you had the 7, 6, 5, 4, this countdown, and right into the theme song. Very cool stuff.
Oh yeah, I was watching the finale, or the last episode, and the robot was hooked up to that big magnet, and it was like 3, 2, 1, da 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 da, and I was like, oh, it's so exciting.
I got tingles.
They had some really creative opening credits, with the animation and stuff. And I liked the credits where they had the family in their space suits on the umbilical. That was really clever. And I liked the countdown. The countdown is really exciting. I think I like that one because I like the theme more than the other theme. But they did some neat things with the opening.
Well, the interesting thing with the credits is it was always guest starring Jonathan Harris at the end. And that was because he felt if he couldn't have top billing, he wanted to be the last credit on the screen, and he wanted to be differentiated in some way. So that's why they were like special guest star, even though he was in every episode.
He was smart. I mean, they had written Smith, he played it as the villain that first 2 or 3 episodes, but he's the one that brought the more comedic tone to Dr. Smith, obviously working with Irwin Allen and the writers.
Oh, yeah.
He knew his stuff. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading they were under consideration for the Dr. Smith role before they, thought, well, we'll make him this kind of a character, was Carroll O'Connor. Archie Bunker himself, and they said at the time he'd been in like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and he'd done some television. He's more of like a chameleon type actor. He wasn't typecast as Archie Bunker yet. That would have been interesting.
You bubble-headed meathead. Yeah, speaking of that, I've got a list here, and I'm not going to read everything. But you can look online, just look up Dr. Smith robot insults. And they have all the different things he called the robot over the years. So there's like addle-plated amateur, arrogant automaton, bobbling bird brain, babbling bumpkin, of course, bubble-headed booby, cackling cacophony, calamitous clump. I'm just kind of skimming through some of these. Disrespectful dunderhead.
Well, Bob, you have to do it in a Dr. Smith
I'm not going to
voice.
do that. But there's quite a few. But yeah, there's probably like 100 different things he called the robot over the years.
It's really interesting. And it played on me as a kid because I remember crying during certain episodes. Again, I was watching.
He insulted the robot.
Yeah, well, the robot was going to sacrifice himself and he was going to melt himself down. And I'm like, I remember crying my eyes out watching this as, you know, a 6-year-old thinking they're killing the robot, you know?
Well, look at like War of the Robots, where, you know, suddenly he's, you know, outdated and not of any use. And of course, Dr. Smith is like emphasizing it to him. You know, I'm going to turn you into a pleasure vehicle and you probably won't be good enough for that.
Yeah, he was telling Will Robinson, I love you, Will Robinson. You're my best friend. And it's like the robot has like emotions, which was way ahead of its time. I mean, it was a kid's show per se, but you know, if you look at something like Battlestar Galactica, where the Cylons were worshiping the one true God, you know, the concept of when do you reach consciousness? And they didn't get into all that with Lost.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might be stretching it a little there, Larry.
Well, you know.
Well, he definitely was given more of a personality as things went by. War of the Robots is funny just because he's there with Will and he's like, I sense my enemy coming. And Will's like, the Robotoid? No, Dr. Smith.
Yeah.
This is the thing. I know that Dr. Smith is like a high point for the show for a lot of people, but I just wanted to hit him in the head with a 2x4. He drives me up the wall. I'm like Dawn, you know, Dawn is like right on the edge of killing Dr. Smith almost every episode. Like he's constantly like telling Robinson, like, you're going to go back for him? You're going to do this? You're going to do why we should pitch him out the airlock? And I'm kind of like, yeah, Dawn is right. Every bad thing that happens to him, they trust him like, okay, we're going to test fire the engines. So Dr. Smith, we want you to press the green button, the black button, and the red button. Can you do that? Oh, of course I can do that. Yes, it's child's play. And then they go off and they're like, okay, press the buttons. And it's the pink and the green and he blows up the engine. It's like they trust him to do stuff. He always screws them over. It's just like, why? I just want to like strangle the man.
Well, there's one episode where he has that can that he writes SOS on and he records a tape. He puts it in the can and he goes
I saw that one last night.
Yeah, he goes to like shoot it out into space and he ends up like shooting the robot out with it.
Yes.
But
he's an idiot.
Like,
the man is worthless.
But even like earlier episodes, he was like pure evil. Because, I mean, John Robinson's doing the spacewalk and Dr. Smith has cut his line. So, you know, set him adrift. I mean, he's basically trying to kill him.
Yeah. I think he goes from like pure evil to like imbecilic, you know. He's
imbecilic evil, yeah.
But, the guy, oh my God, talk about the most irritating person on a genre show. I think
it's like Damien from The Omen versus Benny Hill now in The Omen.
But he was memorable.
Well, he is memorable. I'll give him that much.
They were saying that you know, the character of Major West would really like, you know, throw him out the airlock. He's good for nothing, no talent. He really did not like Jonathan Harris because he was taking all of the scenes. So a lot of the disdain was not acting between these actors.
I can believe it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Marta Kristen was telling us that every year on Jonathan Harris's birthday, they get together and have lunch, right? Like the whole cast. And when Jonathan Harris passed away, they would still get together on his birthday, but they'd have like a picture of him at the table. And I guess he always wore these like scarves and things. So they'd all wear scarves and have a picture of him at the table and have lunch every year on his birthday.
My dear man, it's called an ascot.
Yeah. No, it was not an ascot though. It was like a scarf.
I know. I'm
scarf tucked in or something.
That's
poor man's ascot.
That's the other thing though, is that, I mean, he comes off very gay. They didn't do anything. Obviously it was the 60s and everything, but his mannerisms and everything, he's very flaming. And it's just shocking that they did that back then, you know, with a character on a show, because it just seems so obvious now. I don't know what people thought back then, but watching it now, it's like, man, this guy is like a super queen. I mean, it's just, I don't know, just smack you in the face with it.
Well, I think it was a different time. I mean, you're watching this, you know, back in the 60s, early 70s, no one's asking what Dr. Smith's gender pronoun is. You know, it wasn't really a thing.
I know, but people, I mean, I don't know. I won't push the podcast in any direction, but it just is obvious watching it now that.
Well, I mean, you know, if you look at Dr. Smith, he only really has one friendship on that whole spaceship.
Oh yeah,
and that's Will.
Right.
You know, the robot was like, you know, on again, off again, but you know, I think he'd be willing to sacrifice anyone on that ship for personal gain except for Will.
I think you're right. I would agree with that.
Although he put Will in danger a few times too.
On a number of occasions, right. But, you know, he would try to go get help, whether he went to go get Major West or the robot or whoever, you know, he tried to right the wrong that was done. He never intentionally went to like throw Will out this airlock, you know. Not that that's a redeeming quality.
That's a big compliment. You're the only one on this ship I would not throw out an airlock.
Yes. What's his D&D alignment? Is it chaotic evil or?
Well, let me ask you guys this: what happened to Bloop?
Bloop was still there in the third season. I was stunned because one of the episodes I was watching last night was third season, and they had to strap in for landing on a planet, and Bloop was like in a cabinet. They just showed like Bloop was closing the door.
I didn't see Bloop in the finale.
Well, see, she was a Bloop, but that was not her name. Debbie was her name.
Debbie the Bloop.
Debbie the Bloop.
Yeah. She also had a gig in, what was that Guerrilla Spy thing? Not Matt Helm. That was
Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp.
Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp.
When I was a kid, because I've always been crazy about apes, I wanted to watch Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp so bad. And for whatever reason, my older brother Steve, my brother Steve does not share my enthusiasm for apes. And so I would try to watch Lancelot Link, and there was some other show he wanted to watch at the same time, and he would be, this is stupid. And he would come in and he would change the channel, and I couldn't watch Lancelot Link.
You can't beat the evolution revolution.
Oh, man.
Did you end up buying the box set, Walker, and you watched it like several times
I
throughout
have
the
it.
year?
I have not. I will occasionally look at it on YouTube.
I swear to God, Bob has the box set of almost everything.
Everything.
Well, you got to have Lancelot Link. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I got to get that, actually.
Hey, Mata. Oh, Lancy.
Apparently, I'm going to have to buy the box set of Lost in Space. My wife cut off Hulu. She's like, are you done watching Lost in Space? Yes, dear. Okay, I'm canceling Hulu. Okay, thank you, dear.
Yeah, I thought you guys always latched on to all those pay services.
Well, we're starting to cut down, you know. We're starting to make some change. And there's nothing really on Hulu because I was like, do you have Hulu? She's like, oh, crap, I forgot to cancel it. I'm like, wait, give me 3 weeks.
No, the Lost in Space Blu-ray set, I got to say, is every bit as beautiful as the Batman Blu-ray set.
Oh, okay.
Highly recommended. With all the colors and everything, watching it on Blu-ray, holy smokes. And they got a lot of cool extras, too. In fact, did you guys watch that 2005 cartoon animatic that I posted on Facebook?
Yeah, that was pretty neat.
It was like a pilot, like an animatic for a Lost in Space cartoon. You can find it, listeners, you can find it on YouTube. Just put Lost in Space cartoon 2005 and it'll come up. If you don't put 2005, you'll get the 1973 cartoon, which is really bad. They had a pilot in 1973, and the only character, well, the robot was in it, sort of, but the only character from the original Lost in Space was Dr. Smith, voiced by Jonathan Harris, but everybody else was different. And just really, you want to talk about limited animation. Oh my God. The 2005 pilot animatic thing, I would own the box set now if it ever came out. I thought it was really well done.
Well, I'm going to have to check that out. I know the Batman box set came with digital as well as the Blu-rays. I don't know if Lost in Space has digital.
No, I don't think it came with digital. But it was the Blu-rays, and each disc has extras having to do with whatever episodes were on that disc, and then there's a bonus disc at the end that has a bunch of interviews. In fact, Bill Mumy wrote a script for Lost in Space, like a revival of Lost in Space, where Will Robinson's like in his 30s and they're all older, and he basically showed it to her, or gave it to Irwin Allen, and Irwin Allen's returned it unopened and said, I'm not going to read this because if I ever do a revival of Lost in Space, I don't want you to like sue me for stealing ideas or whatever.
Oh, wow.
But
I wonder if that...
But they, on the Blu-ray, they do a table read of his script where they all come back. The whole cast is doing the table read, except June Lockhart isn't there. So it was Veronica Cartwright, Angela Cartwright's sister, plays Maureen Robinson. And then Guy Williams' son does the Don Robinson role. And Kevin Burns, who was sort of the keeper of the Lost in Space flame all these years, he did Dr. Smith. And it's actually, it's a cool episode. And they have the robot standing there and he does his own role.
That's cool. I wonder if Bill Mumy, he wrote a song about Will Robinson, and it's been 30 years and he's lost in space,
that's on there as well, like the music video for that.
Yeah, that's a very poignant song. A little depressing.
But the Ballad of Will Robinson.
The Ballad of Will Robinson, yeah.
It was nothing like Butch Patrick's whatever happened to Eddie.
Yeah.
Talking about all these DVDs, Blu-rays, and box sets, it's that time in our podcast. Unless you guys have anything final to say about Lost in Space.
Was it midnight on MeTV on Saturday nights?
Lost in Space?
Watch Lost in Space. Support it. Right. Love it.
Karen? Any last?
Danger!
It does not compute.
Pain. Okay, so it's time for our... Does anybody have a censor sweep?
We didn't talk about it.
Crap. I don't really have anything prepared here.
Quick, everybody look around their rooms.
Oh, gosh.
What do you want to talk about? I just assumed
you guys had something Lost in Space oriented for the Lost in Space episode, I guess.
I got a bunch of Lost in Space stuff.
I already talked about the book.
That's right. Well, don't you guys have a different book on Lost in Space that you were using?
Yeah, I had a different book. But let me call up my Amazon purchases here. Yeah, there was one I was going to talk about a couple episodes ago off the top of my head because I didn't prepare this at all.
You're going to have to re-cue this.
Okay.
No, we're going to leave all this in. This is good. This is gold.
Okay. But, so it is time for our censor sweep portion of our podcast. This episode's censor sweep. Chief Engineer Bob, take it away.
Hey. Mark Edlitz has written a book, and that book is The Lost Adventures of James Bond. And these are all projects that happened between the time Timothy Dalton left in License to Kill and Daniel Craig came on in Casino Royale. There were actually 3 or 4 other Bond films planned starring Timothy Dalton that didn't get off the ground. There was also James Bond Jr., which was actually a cartoon on Saturday mornings for a while. And there was like a musical, like a stage musical, and other forgotten 007 projects. All of these are covered in The Lost Adventures of James Bond by Mark Edlitz. And this thing, let me see if it has the page count on here. It's a pretty thick book. And there's a lot of information in there, especially if you're 425 pages.
Wow.
And it's like 11.5 by or 8.5 by 11 size. So if you're a James Bond fan, and you of course listened to our James Bond episode, this is a book for you. It's basically all the things that woulda, coulda, shoulda happened with Mr. Bond.
Very cool.
It still ties in because it's Lost Adventures, and this is Lost in Space.
Dun, 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 dun.
Going back to Moonraker, I guess.
Very cool.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.blogspot.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.
Never fear. Smith is here.
Less talk, more action, please.
Silence, Junini.
My name is William Robinson, I'm 42 years old. I've seen the hot side of the sun, I've seen blue icy cold. I've shot the one-eyed giant down with laser in my hand. But I'll never see my home again or walk on Earth's green land. In 1997, we set out on the Jupiter 2. Bound for Alpha Centauri, my family and small crew. We ran into a meteor storm, the wrong time, the wrong place. It's been 6 months and 30 years that we've been lost in space. My father died 5 years ago, there was no better man than he. My mother's never been the same, and now it's up to me. Our pilot is a handsome man, my sisters both could tell. And Dr. Smith will get us killed, and that may be just as well. I've worked the mines of many worlds for fuel to power our ship. I've got a robot for a friend and helper on our trip. I'm sending out this message now from this ungodly place, in hope someone will rescue us from being lost in space. My name is William Robinson, I'll never take a wife. No children will I father, I have no normal life. Show me mercy in this universe, or show me God's true face. Whisper my name to the stars, for I am lost in space.
Say goodbye to the others for me.
I will. Goodbye.
Especially Will.
Yes, goodbye.
Farewell, Dr. Smith.
I detest drawn-out departures. Go and get it over with.
Yes, get it over with.
Yes.